Saddle up, everybody. It is another episode of the Mainly Broncos podcast. And I'm sure you guys are probably wondering what was with the name change as far as the Mainly Broncos podcast. Well, I'm sure you all know what the hair, the beautiful locks of hair is a horse. It is mane. So therefore, we came up with the name the Mainly Broncos podcast. And today, I am joined by one of my good friends, and I think that even just going back to even the Lockdown Broncos days when I was part of the Lockdown Broncos, and to even when I was even starting out the Cameron Parker show, and from that winter lockdown, Mario Vetanze joins the program, and I am pretty ecstatic to have you on, man, because of course we weren't obviously planning for a unfiltered, well, we always plan for that. But of course, a day like today where the Broncos, of course, make this unprecedented and surprising move to release their starting linebacker, Todd Davis. But it's always a pleasure, man, having you join the podcast.
Dude, I always love being here, and I feel like we haven't gotten down to business for a while. So I'm psyched, dude. I'm glad to be back on the airwaves or whatever this is with you. The podways, is that what they're called?
Yeah,
whatever it is. It's
yeah.
exciting to be here. And yeah, we actually have a decent amount to talk about. Surprisingly, there's been a lot of stuff that's happened in the last couple days.
I know, right? And I guess let's just lead it off with the big news of the day, because I feel like it's like an onion, right, Mario? Like I feel like this particular move, it could go in a lot of different directions, and frankly, it's probably not a wrong direction just because it was such a surprising move that none of us saw coming, because it was a guy that that is clearly valued on that defense, a guy that is a leader, a guy that's a captain, a guy that obviously, sure, based on contract and everything else, sure seemed like a guy that probably was maybe a surprise cut potentially on a bubble, but in our eyes and in our views, though, of what a starting defense would have been like this year in a bizarre 2020, certainly we all kind of figured that Todd Davis would be in the mold.
I guess the thing that really caught me off guard was the fact that when you look at this defense and you look around and see how stacked it is at pretty much every other position, you get the trade of Isaac Yiadom, which took me by surprise. I know there are a couple people out there. I think Sayre actually had come out and said that he wouldn't be surprised if Isaac got traded in the next couple days, and it actually ended up happening that day. So just props to Sayre for being a soothsayer, so to speak. Yeah. But with Todd Davis, man, especially with the injury to Stranad, I really thought for sure, like, if you had told me yesterday, like, oh, yeah, Todd Davis is on the chopping block, I'd say, no, there's absolutely no way. We have no depth at the linebacker position. And I get it. They signed Mark Barron. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know a lot about him. I haven't watched film on him. I've been kind of following along with the people that do film, that break down film. It hasn't been overwhelmingly positive, to the point where I felt really comfortable with Mark Barron taking over full time for Todd Davis. When they signed him, it was supposed to be, he's filling in for Todd until he gets back. And this kind of struck me as the same kind of deal that happened last year where, Todd got hurt in preseason. And I think he missed the first few weeks, and we saw Josie Jewell and then the emergence of AJ Johnson, and the rest is history with that. But it kind of struck me as it wasn't as bad as last year's injury. And Todd was, from what I had heard, Todd was almost certainly going to miss week 1. Like, it would have taken a miracle for him to actually play football. And I know we saw videos of him running around on the field and moving pretty well, but there's a difference between being able to do that and actually being ready to play in a professional football game, especially a middle linebacker. So, yeah, that was what was so bizarre, is it's not like we have a lot of depth at that position. Obviously you have Alexander Johnson, Josie Jewell, who, was given basically the starting job and lost it last season. You have a Josh Watson out of CSU, who I think is also a bubble guy. Joe Jones, who's really made his name on special teams. So that was the most bizarre thing for me, Cam. And you see something like this, you assume that there's a move around the corner. Again, I don't know enough about Mark Barron to say, yeah, they're comfortable moving forward with him. Maybe that's the case. But then again, he's been in Denver for 2 days. I doubt that the team has seen anything out of Barron since he got here that have convinced them, oh, we can move on from Todd Davis because we really like what we've seen from Mark. But that can't be the case because he's been here for a cup of coffee.
Right. And then, of course,
he doesn't even know where the Dutch Brothers is, Cam.
I know.
He's barely been here for a cup of coffee.
And luckily for me, I actually know where a Dutch Brothers is. I could actually walk to a Dutch Brothers from.
But that's because you've been here for longer than him. I'm saying he's been here so like for so little time. He's like, well, where's the closest Dutch Bros? I don't even know.
Well, and of course, then of course there's this whole speculation now, and with everything that happened as far as the trade that potentially sparked a Todd Davis deal. So what happened was the Broncos traded a depth defensive lineman, a guy that they actually signed in this offseason. They traded him to the Cincinnati Bengals, and they traded him for Austin. I almost want to do a cliss and call him cilantro, but I'm going to say Austin Calitro, like actually pronounce his name.
Don't ever do a cliss anything. Don't do that. He's the worst.
Well, so anyway, so they acquired Austin Calitro, and based on everything that I'm hearing, and then of course everything that happened with the Todd Davis thing, it still is just so frustrating because, okay, so is this Calitro guy, is he going to end up being a special teamer? Is he going to be a guy that, of course, there's been a tweet that was unpacked by Bobby Wagner saying that he's a special player, he's a baller. So, I mean, obviously, players, they never lie. They see it sometimes how they are, and I mean, they kind of tell it like it is. And so if a player or a great player at that, Bobby Wagner, is just saying that he sees this type of player in Calitro, then maybe we all have to believe it. But at the same time...
But how often are guys going to come out and just badmouth somebody?
Well, that's true.
And it's like, guys are going to come out and be like, yeah, that Calitro, man, he's a slappy. He's no good. So, anytime a player tries to evaluate another player, I think you got to take it with a grain of salt. Like, we don't know if they're boys. Like, what if they're buddies or,
True.
Bobby Wagner was trying to do him a favor. So all I'm saying, and he could be a little diamond in the rough guy. I honestly don't know. I had never even heard of him before today. So honestly, I haven't watched film on him at all. Right. He's played for Jacksonville and Cincinnati. So just given that situation, I have a hard time believing that there's great film on him because it's not like either of those teams have put out much of a positive recently. So yeah, dude, I don't know. I would be very surprised if they're just going to call it a day after this. So first off, if I'm trying to rationalize this, and I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it, like I already took a hit with Isaac Yiadom, and I get it. He had a bit of a reputation here, but Isaac was my guy, man, and I thought that he was honestly due for a breakout season. And from what I've been hearing from guys around the team is that he was really making a push to be that number 3 corner, or at the very least that it was kind of going to be between him and Bosby, and those two were almost going to alternate, and they were going to play the hot hand. So like already like trying to get over that, and now this bombshell gets dropped. So if we're going to rationalize it, I would have to say it's got to be a money thing. I mean, I feel like that's become the common thread with the Denver Broncos is it's about the money, right? Like, and granted, it's not like it's even that much, especially for a starting inside linebacker. And maybe they're playing the long game, Cam, because we already know like they got Justin Simmons coming up. They got to figure out, if they end up keeping Garrett Bowles, they got to figure that out. Cortland Sutton's coming up in a couple of years. That dude Von Miller's contract, they're going to have to revisit that in 2021. So maybe it's the long game. Alexander Johnson, Chubb is coming up. So maybe they're playing the long game, right? Maybe they're saying, we like the defense, and this defense is more about Fangio almost than it is about the individuals, right? Like you find guys who fit the mold of a Fangio defense, and you're more concerned with that than like the actual individuals. And they just got, like I said, it's a long-term play where they're trying to free up as much money as possible to make sure that they don't let a Justin Simmons walk or a Bradley Chubb or Von Miller, and the list goes on and on of guys whose contract is coming up. So we'll see, man. But that's the only way I think I can rationalize it. You know, maybe they went to Todd, and I don't know this for sure, but maybe they went to Todd, asked him to take a pay cut. He said no, and decided to cut him and just cut their losses.
Well, you know, and I think that as far as like and I think you put it, the only way that we could actually rationalize this is the fact that it is a money thing. And I think right now they sit at $30 million right now in cap space. And if they aren't going to make any moves, then that $30 million is going to roll over into next year. And for all intents and purposes, and obviously extending players, I will gladly take it because, again, you have Justin Simmons coming up, and they probably, I'm praying at this particular point, but I'm praying that they can actually ink a deal with him. They'll probably, if they can't get a deal done, franchise tag him once again, but we all know, Mario, that once that happens, once they end up franchise tagging him a potential second year, they probably won't play on it, which thus is either
very unlikely, yeah.
Which is a more likely scenario that an extension is going to happen. And then you have Chubb happening, and then you have Courtland Sutton potentially happening. So and who knows if we get a potential lesser deal with Von Miller? Obviously not the same deal that he once signed. So yeah, they got a lot of question marks, and I think that even with unpacking all the moves that happen, I think you put it best too, that maybe this is just the year that we start to see Vic Fangio's defensive mastermind really come through, because I feel like these are what we would call like COVID linebackers, and that may come out that may come out wrong. But what I mean is obviously people that will be there to hold down the fort for Justin Strnad in 2021. So guys that, I mean, they could re-sign a Mark Barron next year. They could probably keep a Calitro this upcoming year. Obviously Josie Jewell, I don't think he's entering a contract year, but just the fact that obviously this store, for what seemed like 3 or 4 hours ago that he was on the roster bubble, well, he may not be on the roster bubble. He may actually be starting. So I think it's just a very crazy time for a bunch of these linebackers to where, you know, especially Josie. I mean, for the sake of Josie Jewell, you know, here's a guy that, I mean, he's an instinctual guy. He's a very smart player. And it's a guy that, for all intents and purposes, is coming from that Iowa program. He comes well respected. And so he's clearly going to be earning the respect of the teammates and has earned the respect of the teammates. But when you put him on the field, unfortunately in pass coverage, that's where you see the liability. In the run game, he's pretty decent. He's pretty good in the run game. So maybe this is just a nod that Vic Fangio knows what he's doing. He's going to get a bunch out of the Mark Barron signing, which, since now you and I are talking face to face, I did want Mark Barron. Now, I didn't necessarily think, based on the options that were available, that Mark Barron would even be sniffing a chance. But as we all know, the options at linebacker were pretty darn limited when they signed when they actually signed him about a few days ago. So, I mean, maybe this is just a simple case of a lot like, you know, and I think I had mentioned this in the last podcast that we were doing with Maddie, Mario, but I had mentioned that if Mike Munchak believes in Garrett Bowles as his left tackle, and Garrett Bowles believes in Munchak to be the best left tackle, then we actually have to take that. Because obviously Mike Munchak is a Hall of Fame offensive line coach. He's a Hall of Fame player. We should take that at his word. Doesn't mean we may be frustrated potentially as a fan base or anything else, but just we need to at least trust the fact that Garrett Bowles will put in a good product on the field. And as for Mark Barron, same goes for that in Vic Fangio, right? Because Vic Fangio has a lot of history with the linebackers, guys like Patrick Willis and Navarro Bowman and Ray Lewis, obviously pass rushers and Von Miller and Khalil Mack. So his history goes well deep with that. So maybe we're just looking at it from the standpoint that maybe we will get, in air quotes, the best Mark Barron that we've now seen in the National Football League.
Yeah, I think it all depends on how they're going to run this team. I mean, I could even see with the line, the guys on the line that they have. So let's assume that Purcell, who was one of the top-rated guys, I think, wasn't he actually the first or second top-rated run defender on the defensive line last season? If he's your nose, you got Shelby and Draymond Jones or some combination, or, Jarrell Casey in there, and then you have Vaughn and Chubb on either side. Those 5 guys up front, they kind of afford you the luxury of not needing that good of a linebacker in terms of the run game. So maybe they just go smaller, maybe Barron kind of plays sparingly, and then they get a 6th DB in there. You got the 5 down lineman, a fifth DB in there. So you have the 5 down linemen, the 5 DBs, and then A.J. Johnson there in the middle. I mean, I don't know if that's their thought process, where they figure they're going to stuff the run simply because of the front 5 that they'll have on that defense. And then they can just kind of cycle guys in and out. Like, honestly, you could put a Duke Dawson, assuming that he makes the team. You could put a Duke Dawson there in the middle, or even a Michael Ojemudia, shift them more in the middle in nickel and dime situations. So, and it might be like a Corey Nelson situation of last year, where he started that week 1 game against Oakland, even though he had about a week to prepare and a week to learn this whole Vic Fangio defense, which, if Mark Barron ends up starting, which sounds like it's going to be the case, this is a lot to unpack. He's not going to know that whole defense, and it almost handcuffs the defense, because you need to call plays and shifts and audibles and whatever else that he understands. Are you going to hold his hand through this process, or are you just going to throw him into the deep water and say, all right, sink or swim time? So there's so many variables to it that I'm at a wait and see point right now. We're going to wait and see who makes the team, who gets cut, if they bring in anybody else. I assume that they're going to make calls. From the way I understand it, they made a call about Myles Jack, but nothing is, there's no progress whatsoever. A call was placed, and it's kind of been left at that. So we'll see. I mean, I can't imagine Myles Jack not being available given what's going on in Jacksonville. I mean, I don't know how much more obvious you can make it that you want Trevor Lawrence on your team, but it's worth a shot. But yeah, man, that's, like I said, we'll wait and see, and whatever happens, happens. But if there's a guy in the league that I trust to kind of fill that void, it would have to be Fangio.
Right. And then kind of unpacking some more layers, let's talk a little bit about Alexander Johnson. Because I think that despite everything that we had seen from Todd Davis and everything that he was as a leader and a tremendous run stuffer, and he was good in pass coverage, but obviously it wasn't to what you would potentially see out of guys like some of the great ones, right? Like a Luke Kuechly or potentially some of a Bobby Wagner or those players. But he was underrated enough. And arguably one of the most underrated members of that Broncos defense, right? But with Alexander Johnson, it seems to me, and especially with how he came along last season, and we had mentioned Mike Purcell earlier, you can make an argument that with Mike Purcell and Alexander Johnson, those are probably 2 of the most important moves that they ever could have made as far as inserting in the lineup, because that single-handedly, just those substitutions really just turned the tide on that defense. And for Alexander Johnson, you're looking at a guy that his coverage, based on covering linebackers and possibly tight ends and short yardage, he's honestly pretty darn good. And in the run game, we know how incredibly athletic and fast he is to run downhill as far as a linebacker. So maybe Johnson is a guy that they probably looked at as a Davis replacement in some ways, just because I think he's younger. Well, he's obviously younger, but she's a guy that might be a little bit more athletic, a guy that could bring a lot more to the table, and a guy that clearly played exceptionally well from week 4, I believe, right after the Jacksonville game. And just really the defense as a whole just played incredibly well with both of those guys in there.
Yeah, so let's shift gears. Let's talk about the offense a little bit. I mean, honestly, with all this going on, the thing to keep in mind, Cam, is this defense is going to be fine. This defense is filled to the rafters with talent. Obviously, Fangio's pulling the strings, calling the shots. You got all these guys, the majority of them in their second year in this system, guys like Kareem Jackson and Justin Simmons, who are undoubtedly the best safety duo in the league. You have arguably the deepest defensive line / edge rushers in the league. So I'm not worried about the defense. I mean, this is going to be a talking point because Todd Davis was one of the few remaining guys from that Super Bowl team. But people are worried about the offense, right? And here's the thing that you're going to see with the offense. There are going to be growing pains. There are going to be times where the offense is going to be frustrating, but then there are going to be times that the offense is going to be fantastic. And it all depends on if they're going to tether Drew Lock or not. Now, not to make the direct comparison, because obviously there's not a quarterback in this league that's like Mahomes, based off of like a scheme fit / talent standpoint. But you look at a Drew Lock where the plays that he's able to make outside of the pocket, the throws that he's capable of making on the run or while he's improvising, it has the potential to be somewhat in that stratosphere. But the problem from what I'm hearing from a lot of the guys is he's just not at that point yet where they feel comfortable letting him sling it, letting him run and gun. And maybe it's because it's practice. Maybe it's because they're trying to keep him in the box, learn the system. But then when the league starts, or they don't want to get things on film. But maybe when the league starts and we're up playing real football again, maybe they unleash Drew Lock and let him be the quarterback that he is able to be. Because part of the problem with him last year, and despite going 4-1, people still weren't overly pleased and extremely confident with Drew Lock going into this year. And it's because, the teams that he beat, the defenses that he beat weren't that good. It's like, yeah, but you have to keep things into perspective. Patrick Mahomes played one game his rookie year, and it was here in Denver, week 17, in a game that really nobody cared about. That's why Mahomes was playing instead of Alex Smith at the time. The no-fly zone was kind of on its way out. A lot of those guys didn't even play in the second half. And Patrick Mahomes, I think he had somewhere around 250 pass yards and an interception. So if like the Chiefs fans going into the following year, I wonder if there was the same speculation where, he had some throws that were good, but, he was going up against the Broncos defense that was kind of depleted and they weren't really playing for anything, and he didn't even throw a touchdown. And that turned out to be just fine. So I don't want to compare last year, especially because it was a completely different system, it was a completely different team, a completely different scenario. So moving forward, I have no problem with the fact that he's making mistakes in camp. That's when you want to make mistakes. If you think back to a couple of years ago, Cam, the dude that was never throwing an interception in camp was Case Keenum. Case Keenum had us all so psyched that we're like, man, we've got the pieces in place. Like, we still have Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders, and our defense is still formidable. We still got guys over there. All Case Keenum has to do is not turn the ball over, and we got this. And then what did he do, Cam? All he did was turn the ball over during the regular season. Preseason scrimmages are zero indication of how successful a quarterback's going to be. Make the mistakes now. Shoot, if he goes out there and he throws 4 touchdowns and 2 picks in week 1, I'm over the moon ecstatic because he's slinging it. And what was the comp that we heard from day one? He's a Jay Cutler, except with a better attitude. If Jay Cutler had a better attitude and he was in a better system that suited him and he was just like not Jay Cutler, he would have been an elite quarterback. Yeah, he'd still be playing and he would have made even more money than he had. So if that is the comp that we're going to get, you got to untether the guy. You got to let him get out of the pocket. You got to let him use his legs. You got to let him throw the ball downfield, make plays. Sometimes he's going to get picked. Sometimes he's going to make mistakes. That's perfectly fine. But if you keep him in a box, he'll never amount to his full potential.
That's right. Because if he doesn't work out, they should just sign you.
I mean, my phone is always on, man. And whenever it is, we end up deciding to play this weekend because everybody's all over the place. Whenever
Right.
we decide to play football again, I'm going to have to get some cameras out there. I'm going to have to call up some scouts. Who's the guy that breaks down the phone? Joe Rolls. I'm going to have to call him up, say,
Yeah.
Man, take a look. We'll film the workouts. I can throw that 20-yard out. That's the easiest throw. That's the hardest throw to make. And I can put a dime on it. It's no problem. Now, I don't need to be a starter, Cam, but it's like, you put me up against Jeff Driscoll, I'll do okay. I'll do all right.
Well, of course, anybody that wants to offer, say, a 1-year, $2 million deal, I'll take it. I'm not going to hesitate. I'll take it. But it's funny. We're talking about the offense, right? And we're talking about Locke. One of the things that we were talking a bit about in our previous podcast, Mario, was talking a bit about how we could potentially see, and I know it's week 1 and I know it's a regular season game, but because of the fact we are in such a weird year with COVID, that week 1 and potentially maybe even week 2, I don't know, just because it's still hard to gauge, but week 1's matchup very well could end up being like a preseason game. Obviously, Locke will be under center for the entirety of the game, but to kind of what you're saying, Mario, we might not get, say, an unleashed version of Locke until probably the Bucs game is my guess. I think
that's a good point, and I think you bring up a good point where we're gonna see some sloppy football week 1, man. And even though these guys have been, they're practicing in pads, they're hitting each other. There's no shortage of hitting. There hasn't been any legit tackling. Like, there hasn't been a lot of wrap up, drag him down tackling. So, yeah, I think we're going to see a little bit of sloppy football, not just from the Broncos, Titans, from all 32 teams across the league. And that's what's so imperative with these preseason games is to just knock the rust off, because it's one thing to scrimmage against your own guys. It's a complete another thing to go out there in an actual game setting and see and feel and hear what everything is going to be like. So, yeah, week 1, week 2 of the NFL season, I would say depending on the matchup, you either bet all under or all over, depending on what the strengths are of those teams. So going into this Tennessee-Denver game, I'm taking the under, man. I'm going under all of the way because you have two really aggressive, very good defenses against offenses that, with the Broncos, it's kind of a question mark. With the Titans, it's like, yeah, well, they run the ball a lot, but if, are you going to hand the ball to Derrick Henry 30 times? And if that doesn't work, well, shoot, like, we don't really have a plan B.
Right. And we know exactly what happened in the last matchup that happened with Tennessee. The Broncos shut him out with Joe Flacco at quarterback, and obviously,
that took all the pressure off of Flacco, didn't it?
Right. Oh yeah, no kidding.
Flacco I was actually like, man, if the defense just keeps getting shutouts, I'd win a lot more games.
Well, and of course, then we could probably put, I guess, for an objective view and a little bit of an asterisk, I guess, on the Ryan Tannehill part, because Ryan Tannehill did see the game along with Marcus Mariota. But, I mean, the fact is the Broncos defense came to play, the Tennessee Titans defense came to play. We might very well get almost the duplicate, probably except for the goose egg on the scoreboard. But we could probably get that type of game again. I mean, just a defensive juggernaut game to where teams are just going to be controlling the line of scrimmage on the defensive side of the ball, to where offenses are just going to struggle. And whether that's because it's a vanilla or just a bland offensive play call on both sides, or whether that's just a really stout defensive game plan, I think we're just going to just see it from the standpoint of, okay, well, teams are probably just on the simple standpoint of they're just going to probably just take it slow is my guess, maybe. But, I mean, there could probably be some plays here and there where you're just looking at it from the standpoint of, okay, we could probably see that, a few weeks down the road. But, I don't know. It's still just so hard to predict, because one of the things that, for me is like, would it shock me if week 1 they just automatically just unleash everything, like they just unleash the game plan?
That's what I would do, but that's people who play Madden, that's what they do, right? Like, I would open up like, you know what? First play, all go. Everybody's running a go route. Get downfield, Drew, throw it up as far as you can, and just hope somebody runs under it. Like, there's something like that. Like, open it up, man, right? But I think what we're actually going to see is going to be very methodical, very well thought out. The teams, they're going to play the field position battle, and they're going to kind of leave it up to the defense. And this strikes me as a game that, whoever wins the turnover battle, which, not really going out on a limb, but usually whatever team wins the turnover battle, but that's who we're going to see win this game. I don't think we're going to see a lot of fireworks. I don't think that they're going to have to use the crowd noise an awful lot in terms of, like, on offense, maybe more so with the big defensive plays. That's another thing, man. How are they going to do that? Because a lot of the players were telling me when they had that scrimmage last week that they're pumping in the crowd noise, and they said it almost felt like a game, like a real game in terms of the crowd, but they're looking around and nobody's there.
Right.
That is so weird. It's like Twilight Zone.
It's almost, and I see, and that's the thing. It would be almost like you would have to talk to probably the Rockies, right? Talk to the Rockies or talk to the Avalanche, right? And kind of and at least some of the players, and just be like, okay, well, what did you guys do? Like, get some advice potentially of, like, what did you guys do to really handle all the crowd noise?
Right.
I think that, and so I think that, because it would be really deflating. To be honest with you, it would be really deflating to play in an environment with all that noise, and then all of a sudden you just look up and you see no one in the stands, and you're just like, wait a minute. I'm hearing all this noise, and there's no one here.
But here's what's even crazier, and you bring up a good point with, like, talk to the Avalanche, the Rockies, the Nuggets, kind of see what it's like not having an actual crowd there. But the difference is there are way more people that can attend a football game than can any other sporting event. Like, Mile High holds, over 76,000? That is a lot of empty space. It's like, with hockey and basketball, at least they're indoors. It's kind of a little bit more secluded of an area.
You're looking at, like,
a bit more intimate. Like, you're not looking at as many open seats as you would be at a 76,000 football stadium.
Well, yeah, you're looking at significantly less. I mean, you're looking at the Pepsi Center, because if we're talking Nuggets and Abs, I mean, you're talking about, like, what, Mario, 15 to 20,000 fans?
Right, yeah, right around there.
Yeah. So, I mean, so then maybe what they probably should do, and granted, at this particular point, and maybe with the Buffs and everything, maybe talk to the Buffs, and just maybe say, like, what was your environment like when you had all these, fans, and granted that may be like a stupid question, because, well, it's like, well, they're professionals and they probably should know what a 75 to 80,000 fans in a stadium sounds like.
Somebody need to reach out to the Jacksonville Jaguars and say, so how did you guys play with an empty stadium week in and week out?
Right. And I think it's twofold too, right? We're talking about, okay, what was it like potentially with no fans in the stadium, or potentially what was it like with fans in the stadium? I think the Jacksonville Jaguars is a good one, just because, they don't, and it's nothing bad, but it's just, they just never really attracted a huge fan base to their stadium. So what was it like? And so I think it's a very interesting scenario, especially with the no fans that we're going to be encountering. So one of the things too, and obviously, because I like that this is a Jake Butt fan club podcast right now, Mario.
I'm the conductor of the Jake Butt hype train. Let's go. Choo-choo, mofos, all aboard.
That's right. So it brings me back to the story that was part of the Carlito trade today, when they sent Covington to the Bengals. It opened the door for a guy by the name of DeMarcus Walker to still stick around. And in some ways, man, a lot like Jake Butt, we kind of forget about these guys like a DeMarcus Walker, a guy that if you look at it statistically, and obviously we all know that stats don't tell the whole story, but in like a little over 200 snaps, you're looking at a player that had like 4.5 sacks and like I believe it was like 6 or so tackles for loss. I mean, he was plenty productive in just a little over 200 snaps. And then obviously you got Jake Butt and everything surrounding him to where he clearly, obviously we all know that the injuries have really kind of caught up with him to this particular point. But as you all know, and I've actually talked to you about this before too, is that the only way that you honestly keep a guy, and I feel this way about Walker too, man, that the only way that you keep a guy on the roster like this for 3 years or 4 years is that they are just super, super talented. And for Butt's case, the reason why you're keeping him along is because he is super, super talented, and the guys can't keep up with him in practice. And for Walker, it's the same reason.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. You don't keep a guy like Jake Butt around despite 3 knee injuries for this amount of time if you don't plan on keeping him. So when guys, when we saw these pundits and whoever else on Broncos Twitter and everything who were projecting the roster to have Jake Butt left off of it, I just had such a hard time believing it. I'll admit I'm biased. I love Jake. He's one of my favorite people. But if we're looking at it from a semantic standpoint, they've kept him around all this time. If they didn't want to see what he had on the actual football field, they're cutting him last year. When they put him on IR and he wasn't good to come back and they kept him on IR for the rest of the season, that's exactly what it is, right? Like they would have just cut him, but they kept him around. Every day he's making plays. He's looking good. He's a well-rounded tight end, so he's not just a pass catcher, but at this point, he's definitely a better blocker than Noah Fant and Albert O. It just doesn't make any sense to trail this guy along for 3.5 years just to cut him right before the season that he seems to finally be healthy. And the thing with DeMarcus Walker, as far as I understand it, man, they brought in Christian Covington to push him. And it's just like we've seen, I wouldn't say greatness, but we've seen solid plays made and good plays made by DeMarcus Walker. But it's just like you want so much more out of a second-round pick. If he was a 5th, 6th, 7th-round pick, yeah, man, like you feel really good about a DeMarcus Walker. But then a dude who was like one of the sack leaders in college, wasn't he the ACC sack leader coming
like
out to the pros? I mean, there were very high expectations for him. And he simply hasn't lived up to those expectations yet. And, even this year, I don't see him getting an extension camp simply because that D line is so deep unless we see an injury and then he gets a decent amount of playing time and does something with it. But it just struck me as one of those things where they had signed Covington to push him and D-Walk won the camp battle. And it might be one of those situations where, well, maybe we'll never know who's actually better because we didn't get to see any preseason games. And that's the biggest thing. I think 4 is too many, like way too many. I think 2 is the perfect number. You get one preseason game where all of your starters play like 1 to 2 quarters. They get a chance to kind of knock the rust off, get back into football shape, see what it's like to be out there, go up against a team in a different colored jersey. And then you have a second preseason game for the bubble guys, dudes who are fighting for those last 5 to 10 spots. And then the guys like, who are you going to bring back on the practice squad? Who are you going to release into the world? I think that's why you need at least 2 preseason games. So, it's just going to be one of those situations. And I'll tell you what, man, there's going to be at least one guy that gets cut because he did not get to shine in preseason, in a preseason game, who's going to get picked up by another team and is probably going to shine elsewhere. And one of the examples that I've used in terms of guys making teams is Fred Brown. You look back to last preseason, and there were, and I don't even remember their names, but there were other receivers, and not Juwan Winfrey, But it was just the undrafted guys that everyone was so excited about. They're like, oh, this guy he's going to mess around and make the team. There were 2 other wide receivers. They were the talk of camp because they were making plays. Go ahead. You know who they are?
I think it's like, what was it? It was something, Kelvin McNitt or something. Kelvin
McKnight, and then there was another dude.
Was it Trinity Benson or something like that?
Benson. There you go. Way to go. I knew you knew it, Cam. But see, that's the point. They were the talk of the town last year. Those 2 dudes, it's like, oh, one of these guys is going to make the roster. And then what happened when they played actual games? Fred Brown was a gamer. Homeboy ended up making the team and got a little bit of play time during the season last year. He wasn't just a P squad guy. So that just illustrates the importance of at least one preseason game, man, because if you don't have preseason games, Fred Brown doesn't make that team, might not even be on the P squad. But he got a chance to showcase his skills. And that's the other thing, Cam. It's not just guys who need a job in Denver. There are guys that are trying to get a job anywhere. You know that you can't keep everybody. So what else is preseason? It's a showcase for guys who know that they don't have a spot on that particular team, but it's also a tryout for 31 other jobs. And it's just a shame that they made the decision, the irrational decision, in my opinion, to do that. It's like if the following week you're going to start actual games anyway, what's the harm of having one preseason game? I just don't get it.
Right. And I feel like, too, that even brings in full circle to the autumn trade, right? Because there was so much talk about even during COVID and during the NFL news, right? Like that it was going to be really hard for undrafted free agents, undrafted players to make a roster, right? I mean, that was the talk of like national news and everything with the NFL.
Absolutely.
And what happens, man? They trade Yadam to the Giants for a conditional 2021 7th-round draft pick. But what does that do? That opens the door for a undrafted free agent, a guy named Isang Bassi, who is just clearly, according to Fangio, he's getting rave reviews consistently in camp. And I always kind of found it a little, it made sense on the surface just because we're in 2020 and nothing makes sense at this particular point. But what did make sense is just that you can't change a coach's or you can't put an opinion or force an opinion on a coach. It's still a coach's decision no matter what. And so if Fangio in particular really liked what he saw and has seen from Bassi, then Bassi could end up being that guy or one of the guys that ends up making it onto the 55-man roster, I believe it is for what they're doing this year. And plus, too, they have a bigger practice squad list this year because of COVID. So we could see even a bunch of players make the Denver Broncos this year.
Yeah, like I said, man, it's the craziest thing about all of this is we almost don't know what to say because there's so many things that go against the grain, so many things that are abnormal about this season. And yeah, I would be surprised at this point if Bassi didn't make the team. But then you kind of look at, how many corners are you keeping? And then you have to look at it in terms of special teams as well. Because if we're being realistic, very, very slim chance, unless something catastrophic happens, Bassi's not going to be on the field as a cornerback. In fact, we hope that we don't see it because that means that multiple of our starting corners got hurt, and we don't want to see that. So then you have to start approaching it from the special teams standpoint. Now, who's a better special teamer between, Duke Dawson, Devontae Harris, and Isang Bassi? So if it comes down to that, you're keeping, a Dawson and a Harris, I think,
right,
clearly. And nothing against Bassi, but he's an undrafted rookie. You can easily put him on the practice squad, and you're talking about a guy who was an undrafted rookie with no play time in a preseason game. No team is going to sign him to their active roster who has never actually gotten to see him. But then you start talking about a guy like Devontae Harris or Duke Dawson who had very bright moments last year on a team playing in a defense where they had to learn it on the fly. Those two guys were brought in at the very end of camp when camp was over, right before week 1, and they kind of got thrown into the fire a little bit. So, just to liken it to the offensive side of the ball, where a Jake Rogers is probably going to make the team over a Calvin Anderson, not necessarily because he's better, but because he has that game experience. Now, I honestly don't know who's better between Duke Dawson, Devontae Harris, and Asang Bassi, but if they're following that form of logic, which it seems like they are, they're going to give the nod to guys that have actual game experience. And, it's just not the year for Asang Bassi, in my opinion. I hope that I'm wrong. And again, I don't know enough about it. I've seen limited film on him, but I haven't actually seen him play. I've seen Duke Dawson and Devontae Harris play. Those guys can get the job done. We know that. So again, it comes down to special teams, and it comes down to, who are you more comfortable having out there if something happens with an injury.
Well, and of course, too, with game experience, that could potentially even leave a door open. If there was one signing, I know there was talk, of course, that they're going to roll over the $30 million, right, to next year. Maybe that one move that they actually do make is that they bring in Prince Amukamura. Sure, I will talk it up because he's a former Husker. The fact that I don't want that.
Nope, I don't want him. But I'm sick of you talking about him. He is a former Husker, and he is a former Raider. He is the lowest of the low. He is the bottom of the barrel. He's
chum. Is that what is
dung on my shoe? And I will have nothing else to say about it.
I'm just saying, if you were talking about game experience and of course relationship with Vic Fangio, then that's about like the only way you could actually make sense of a potential new move that could potentially be coming if the Broncos decide to do that. But I'm not expecting anything to happen, of course, with Prince or really any move for that matter. But Mario, it was awesome, man. We finally got a chance to do this. We finally got a chance to get on the pod together. And this is and word of advice to anybody that is listening to this too. This is not going to be the first and only time. This will be a multiple occurrence with Mr. Well Adjusted over here.
Yeah, we're going to get in on it repeatedly during the season when we actually have real stuff to talk about it. And I can't wait. Go Broncos.
I know, man. So for Matty Moles, who's not here, for Mario Vetanze, you guys can follow him, Mario, where?
Mile High Mario. Twitter, Instagram. Do not send me a friend invite on Facebook. I hate Facebook. Won't accept it.
Unless it's for me.
Well, we're already friends, so no one else send me invites. Please and thank you.
Yes. And, of course, if you want to go, but more importantly, if you want to go visit Mario, please go visit Mario at Vetanze Therapy. I have done so. My mom has done so. We cannot speak more highly of the man. He is,
man.
I mean, he is an incredible, to put it lightly, he's probably the one that could probably bring balance to the Force that's not named Anakin Skywalker. We'll just go it that way. But thank you.
I'm the Jedi of the human body, but I bring balance to the body.
Right. You're like
the
that.
Force.
You're
Boom,
like,
there it is.
Oh, I know what it is. You're like the Anakin Skywalker of chiropractors. There we go.
I don't know if I want to be Anakin Skywalker. Let's go with Obi-Wan Kenobi.
Okay, we'll go with Obi-Wan Kenobi. That works. Hey, it's a Jedi Master. It still works. You're still the Jedi. You're the Jedi of the human body. He's Mario Vetanze. I'm Cameron Parker. Follow Matty at Matty Moles Pod. Follow myself at Cameron Parker PO. Listen to this pod on iTunes, Spotify, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, and as well as the Google Podcast as well. So listen to us everywhere. This is the Mainly Broncos podcast. Thank you guys very much for listening.